Hello knitters, I'm Susanne Sommer of SOSUknits, and it's time to get started with the Brioche plus Mystery knit along. I'm so excited to finally get started on part 1 of the pattern, to finally share the design with you. I've so enjoyed seeing all your color combos posted on social media. So if you want to just keep on sharing your progress, sharing your WIP, chatting with fellow knitters, please use the hashtag SOSUKNITS 2021 on Instagram and Facebook. And please also use the Facebook group that I've set up. You can find all the links below this video and on my website, sosu.at. There you can also find links if you have not bought the pattern yet, so you can purchase the pattern via my website as well. Yeah, let's get started on part 1. If you have not knit brioche before, this video tutorial should guide you along the way and let you know everything you need to know to knit this first part of the pattern. But if you just want to brush up your brioche a little bit more, you can find video and photo tutorials on all the basic brioche stitches on my website, just to dive in a little more and be a little more secure in your brioche maybe. So if you have any questions, use all those social media channels. I unfortunately will not be able to provide support on Ravelry, but you have lots of other places and ways to reach me if you have any questions or just want to share. It's a knit along, it's not a race, so please don't feel the need to finish in a day or in 2 days or the weekend or the week. Knit at your own pace. I want you to have fun and enjoy it and relax, or just share in this joy of knitting. I hope it will get us a little closer together. We've been apart and distanced for so long that I hope this knit along is going to be a good way to feel a bit more connected. So I don't want it to add any stress to your life, so please don't feel like you need to finish on a deadline. So that's not the idea of the knit along. Okay, then get started. Get your materials ready. We're going to need colors A and B. What we're also going to need is needles, and I'm going to start with 2 DPNs, double pointed needles. You don't have to use them, but I like to. And I'm going to switch over to circular needles once I have more stitches on my needles. And the last thing we're going to need, so we need yarn, we need needles, and we're going to need 1 stitch marker. You don't have to use one of those purchased ones. You can just make a loop with your with some yarn ends, leftover bits, and use that as a stitch marker, and it's going to help you find your place a lot easier in the pattern. So I highly recommend using them, and then just having fun. To cast on, I hold the tail end of color A over my pinky and bring the long end, so that's towards the yarn ball. I bring it over my index finger and my thumb, and I hold it in place here again. So the tail end is towards the back of my index finger, and the ball end is towards my my thumb. And instead of making a slip knot, I'm just inserting my needle under the strand of yarn here, and I hold it in place on my needle with my thumb of my right hand, and then I'm going to twist my hand. I'm going to bring the thumb up so I can insert a needle on this strand of yarn that is closest to me. I go under it and I go to this strand of yarn that's on my index finger, and I catch that from above, and I bring that strand of yarn through this loop I created on my thumb. And that's 2 stitches cast on already. And I'm going to repeat that. So I bring this loop here, I still have the tail end on this part of my hand, and I bring the other strand that's tied to the ball end, I bring that back to over my thumb, and I'm going to twist my thumb again and catch the yarn from underneath here. I'm going to twist it a little so I can catch the strand that is over my index finger from above, and I'm going to pull it through this loop I created on my thumb. And then I drop the yarn from my thumb and pull to tighten. And that's 3 stitches cast on already, and that's all we're going to need to start. So for the setup row, I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to work a slip-on yarn over. So I bring the yarn to the front, I slip the stitch knitwise, and I slip the stitch and this yarn, both of them, onto my right hand needle. So the yarn is over the needle to the back, and then I bring it under the needle to the front again and slip my last stitch with yarn in front, purlwise. The first stitch and the last stitch of every row are going to be selvage stitches, and in between there we're going to work our patterns. So here you have one selvage stitch, the first pattern stitch, and the last selvage stitch. So this is already finished, so I can turn around, and this is where the pattern really begins. I'm continuing working with my color A, and I'm on the first row, right side, color A, row 1, right side A, and I start with knitting my first stitch. And the next stitch is going to be a brioche increase. I brioche knit the stitch. I don't drop it off my left hand needle. Instead, I make a yarn over and brioche knit the stitch again. Then I bring the yarn to the front and slip my last stitch with yarn in front. So now I have 5 stitches on my needles. So this is where the row rhythm of brioche really comes into play, because I just worked my first right side row, and now I need to slide all stitches to the other end of the needle so I can work my second right side row with my second color. So what I do is, and that's also the reason why I prefer starting with the DPN, I hold my stitches here in place gently, and then I push the needle through. And it's a lot easier if you only have a small number of stitches on your needles, if you have this straight solid needle instead of having the cable of the circulars. So that's why I start with DPNs. So I push them so the other tip of the needle is right here, and I can start another right side row with my second color. So I go ahead and attach my second color. So this is just going to float here, the tail end, and I'm going to start my second right side row with my color B. And I start the same way by knitting the first stitch. And then I work over this increase. And the way I do it is I bring the yarn to the front, I slip the first stitch purlwise, and I bring the yarn to the back while I slip it, and that's a slip-on yarn over. The next stitch, I'm going to purl the next stitch. Please disregard my strange way of purling. And the next stitch is another slip-on yarn over stitch. So that's one of the basic stitches of brioche. So I bring the yarn to the front again, and I slip the stitch, and I slip also this strand of yarn to my right hand needle. And that's all I need to do for the slip-on yarn over. And because I need to slip my last stitch with the yarn in front, I bring the yarn to the front again and slip my last stitch purlwise. So both right side rows are done. Both of my working yarn ends are on the same side, and that's a clue for me to turn around and start my first wrong side row. I again start with color A and work my first wrong side row with color A. So I'm on row 2 with color A. And all rows start with a knit 1. So I'm going to go ahead and knit 1. And I'm going to work with brioche purl. So that's just purling those 2 loops together. I bring the yarn to the front and work a slip-on yarn over. And then I'm going to brioche purl the next stitch. So that's purling the stitch together with its yarn over. And my working yarn is already in front, so I can just slip my last stitch with yarn in front without having to do an extra step. So my color A is on this side of the work and my color B is on the other side. And because I now need to work a color B row, the only thing that is kind of preventing me from being able to do is I need to start my row here. So what I do is again hold my stitches here in place and I push my needle through. And now the stitches and my working yarn are in a place where I can actually work this second wrong side row with my color B. I again start with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and then I bring the yarn to the front and slip 1 yarn over. So I slip the stitch and this strand of yarn both onto my right hand needles, and the working yarn automatically goes over the needle to the back. The next stitch is a brioche knit stitch, and I just knit the stitch. The stitch is this more pink one, together with the yarn over. The yarn over is the lighter one, and I'm just going to knit those 2 together. That's a brioche knit. Then I bring the yarn to the front again and slip 1 yarn over. And I'm already on my selvage stitch, so I bring the yarn to the front and slip the last stitch purlwise. And at the beginning you want to make sure it's all a little more tightened up so you don't lose track of anything. Later on, when you've had some more repeats, that's not necessary anymore. So both of my working yarns are on the same side, which means I can now turn around and start my row 3 right side color A. So I'm switching colors again and grabbing my color A again, and it starts very similar to our other right side row. I start with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and I'm going to increase into this next stitch again. So I brioche knit the stitch and I leave it on my left hand needle. I make a yarn over and brioche knit that stitch again. And then I take it off my needles. So that's 2 stitches increased into my first brioche stitch here. And then I complete my row in brioche, which means I slip 1 yarn over and brioche knit. Then I bring the yarn to the front to slip my selvage stitch purlwise with yarn in front. And then I need to slide all my stitches to the other needle end again, so I can work a second right side row with my color B. I knit my selvage stitch. Then I bring the yarn to the front to work a slip 1 yarn over. I purl the next stitch. And then I continue with the slip 1 yarn over, brioche purl, slip 1 yarn over to the last stitch, and then I bring the yarn to the front and slip my last stitch purlwise. And then I can turn around and start my second wrong side row. So I'm now on row 4, wrong side A, and I'm starting again with knitting my selvage stitch. And this is a full brioche row, which means I'm going to work brioche purl, slip 1 yarn over, brioche purl to the end of the row. So at the moment that is quite a short row, but it's going to be more repeats, it's going to be longer. So when I finished, this row, I'm going to slide all my stitches again, and I'm going to work row 4 wrong side with color B. And again start with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and then I bring the yarn to the front and work a slip-on yarn over. And I can already see here this is a knit stitch, so I already know I'm going to brioche knit this stitch. Slip-on yarn over, brioche knit, slip-on yarn over, bring the yarn to the front and slip. So when we turn around, we can already start to see the very beginnings of the mystery shawl. And we're going to repeat these 4 rows. So row 3 and 4, the 2 right side rows and the 2 wrong side rows I just showed you. We're going to repeat them another 3 times. And then I'll see you at the end of that repeat. So this is the finished repeat of rows 3 and 4. I have now 13 stitches on my needles, and I'm going to go ahead and work row 11 right side A as well, which is basically the same as row 3, so should be familiar. And then we're going to add a little something. So I'm going to start again my row with an increase, and then I'm just going to work in brioche knit and slip on yarn over to the end of this row, or to the last stitch, and I'm going to slip my selvage stitch without dropping it. And then I slide my stitches, and now in our second right side row with color B, something a little special happens. So I'm starting a row again, as always, with a knit 1 stitch, and then instead of continuing in brioche, I'm going to purl the next 2 stitches. So these 2 were purled. I'm going to place a marker after these 2 purl stitches, and it's going to separate this new texture here, garter stitch texture here, from my brioche. So I'm continuing in brioche to my last stitch, and I'm working with slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, slip-on yarn over to the end or to the last stitch. So I'm going to work in brioche with brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, until I reach the marker on my first wrong side row. And when I reach the marker, I'm going to slip it to the right hand needle, and then I'm going to purl these 2 stitches, and I'm going to slip my selvage stitch again with yarn in front. And then I slide again, and I'm continuing in 2 color brioche as established to the marker, knitting the selvage stitch, and then slip-on yarn over, brioche knit, slip-on yarn over until I reach the marker. So you can already see it's brioche knit stitches here in my color B on the wrong side. And when I reach the marker, I slip the stitch marker, and then I'm going to knit these 2 stitches, and that will give me a garter stitch texture. And I'm slipping the last stitch again with yarn in front. And when I turn around now, I'm going to continue increasing on this beginning of the beginning of the right side row and the end of the wrong side row, but I'm going to do a different increase here now, and it's a make 1 increase, which means I'm going to knit my first 2 stitches, and then I'm going to make an increase here. And the make 1 increase is kind of like a slip, like a backward slip cast on. There's different ways to do it. It's basically a twisted yarn over, so you can just drop the thread and make a grab it with your thumb and index finger and twist them and place it on your needles. It does not matter, in this case it doesn't matter if you twist in this direction or if you twist in the other direction. It just needs to have a twist so it closes this stitch here. So this is one way to do the make 1 increase. So you just have made this extra loop here on your needles. And I'm going to show you, I'm taking it off again just to show you a different way to do it. This is one way you don't really have to drop your yarn, and this is when your yarn is still on your index finger. I'm just going to bring my index finger to the front and insert my needle from the back towards my fingernail and pick it up, and that also creates this twisted loop here. So that's a make 1 increase, and then I'm knitting to the marker. So on this end of the work, I'm going to make those make 1 increases from now on. And then I finish my row in brioche after the marker, kind of as established. So nothing changes in this pattern or in this texture here. And I work my second right side row with my color B. I knit the first stitch, and to get a garter stitch texture, I'm going to now purl to the marker. So I'm just going to purl over this increase that I made earlier, and I purl to the marker. And after a couple more repeats, you'll see this garter stitch texture emerge. I slip the marker and I continue as established into color brioche until I reach my selvage stitch again. And again I work in brioche as established. After the marker, we're going to purl to the last 2 stitches, and we're going to make another make 1 increase here. So I'm going to just make this simpler version for me, and that is I'm twisting my yarn, my index finger towards me to the front, and I insert my right hand needle from behind towards the nail and drop the yarn from the finger and pull it tight. And it's kind of a backwards loop cast on for the 1 stitch for this make 1 increase. Then I purl the next stitch and slip my selvage stitch with the yarn in front. Then I slide all stitches again and work in brioche to the marker. And then I slip the marker and I'm going to knit to the last stitch. I'm going to just knit over this increase here. Slip the last stitch purlwise with yarn in front. And now when you turn around, you can already see here at the beginning of the right side row is where there's a little garter stitch section here, and then we have the 2 color brioche here, and you can already see quite well, even though I don't have very highly contrasting colors, you can clearly see the difference between my right side and my wrong side. So this is a peachy side, and this is my kind of more beige, gray beige side. Okay, so those two rows, row 13 and 14, both right side are both with color A and color B, so it's 4 worked rows, 2 counted rows, will be repeated once more. And then we have 19 stitches on the needles, and I'm going to do that quickly, and then I'll see you again for the beginning of the next step. So I just finished this repeat of rows 13 and 14, and I have 19 stitches on my needles, and I have 7 stitches here before my stitch marker. And this is where another pattern change happens, another texture change. So we're going to start our next row, that is row 17, right side A, and I'm going to change things up again. So I'm starting again, as always, with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and I'm going to work my next stitch as a slip-on yarn over, which means I bring the yarn to the front and slip the next stitch purlwise. And then I knit the 5 stitches until I reach my marker. And then I'm actually going to just take out the marker, leave it somewhere close by. I'm going to knit it again. And I am going to work as established in 2-color brioche with brioche knits and slip on yarn over stitches until I reach my selvage stitch again. So no changes on this side of the stitch marker. I'm going to slip my stitch marker and slide all my stitches. And on this beginning of the right side row, with my second color, with color B, after knitting my selvage stitch, I'm going to work now my brioche increase with my color B. So the same principle as we had before. I have this brioche stitch here, which is the stitch and the yarn over, and I'm going to increase into this stitch. And after the increase, I'm going to replace my marker. And then I'm going to purl my 5 garter stitches and work as established in 2-color brioche with slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, slip-on yarn over to the end of the row to my selvage stitch. When I turn around and work my wrong side row, first with my color A, I'm going to work all those brioche stitches here at the beginning of the wrong side row with brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl. And then I'm just going to purl those 5 stitches until I reach the marker. And after the marker, I'm going to work in brioche, but in syncopated brioche, and that means I'm going to switch which stitches are purled and which are knit. So in this part here, I worked the normal rhythm of brioche, which means I had brioche purl stitches, and this part here is going to be syncopated brioche, which means I'm going to work with slip-on yarn overs and knit stitches on this row. So I work slip-on yarn over, knit, slip-on yarn over, and I slip the last stitch. So don't get confused about the syncopated part. It just means you have to watch out whether you're going to knit your brioche knit your stitches, brioche purl your stitches, but it is not a new technique. So I'm starting my second wrong side row. I'm on row 18, wrong side, color B, and I'm going to work in brioche with slip-on yarn over, brioche knit, slip-on yarn over as established to the 5 stitches before the marker, and then I'm going to knit those 5 stitches to get my garter stitch texture. And then I slip the marker, and then I continue in syncopated brioche. So here I worked brioche knit stitches, and syncopation means I'm changing which stitches are knit and which are purled, which means here after the marker I'm going to brioche purl, and again slip one yarn over and another brioche purl stitch. So that's the difference. I had knit stitches here and purl stitches here. And what happens is this changes which of those colors shows up on which side. So you can already see here color B showing up on the right side, and in the normal section that we started in brioche at the beginning we had color A showing up on the right side, and now we have a bit of color B showing up here. And we can, when you turn around and look at the wrong side, we have color B dominating here on the wrong side at this first part. And if we look very, very closely, we're starting to see the beginnings of color A dominating here in this part here on the wrong side. So we're switching which color shows up. So it's going to be both colors on both sides. So we're going to just repeat rows 19 and 20, which means I start with my knit one selvage stitch, and then I'm going to start my row now with a slip one yarn over, brioche purl, slip one yarn over, slip the stitch marker, sorry, and I'm going to knit 5, and then I continue as established with brioche knits, slip one yarn over, brioche knits to my selvage stitch again. So all the action happens before the stitch marker on the right side and after the stitch marker on the wrong side. And by action I mean pattern changes and increases. So on the second right side row, careful, careful, this is where now the increase happens. I'm going to brioche knit, slip one yarn over, brioche knit into this second stitch of the row, and then I continue with slip one yarn over, brioche stitch until I reach the marker. Slip the marker and I purl 5. And I work established with slip one yarn over, brioche purl to the end of the row to my selvage stitch. I turn around and I start my row 20 with my color A, my wrong side row, with my knit one selvage, and then I work as established with brioche purl, slip one yarn over, brioche purl to my 5 stitches before the marker. I purl those 5 stitches, I slip the marker, and then I'm switching to the syncopated brioche again, which means I work with slip one yarn over, brioche knit, slip one yarn over to the last 3 stitches, and that is also the where I had to increase on the row before. So I'm going to knit this next stitch and then do another slip one yarn over here, and then I bring the yarn to the front again and slip my selvage stitch. So I knit this middle stitch of the increase here. I slide all stitches, and on the wrong side I can now kind of work as established, which means there is no pattern changes. So I'm going to knit my selvage stitch and then work in slip one yarn over, brioche knit to my 5 stitches before the marker, and then I'm knitting the 5 stitches. I slip the stitch marker and then I work as established to my selvage stitch. And in this case, I have been working brioche knit stitches here at the beginning of the row, and on the end of this wrong side row I'm going to work with brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl. And I slip my selvage stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. And now you can see it a little more clearly. We have color A here in the brioche and color B here in the brioche, and a little garter stitch, 2-color garter stitch in between. When we turn around, you can already see the beginnings of color A here at the beginning and color B over here. And I think you're set now to continue and rock your first section of the mystery of the brioche plus mystery in the long. Please share your progress, have fun knitting, take it slowly, one stitch at a time, and show off your whips. All rows start and end with a selvage stitch. So at the beginning, with only 3 stitches on my needles, that means my first and my last stitch is a selvage stitch, and I only have 1 pattern stitch here in the middle for my setup row. And all rows start with a knit 1 stitch, and this next stitch here is a slip-on yarn over, which means I bring the yarn to the front and slip the stitch purlwise. And that's all there is to do, but my last stitch is a selvage stitch again, and it's a slip 1 with yarn in front selvage stitch, which means I need to bring this stitch, this yarn that is already in front, to the front before I slip the stitch. But I need to make my slip-on yarn over stitch first. I need to finish the slip-on yarn over stitch here first, which means I need to actually make this slip-on yarn over here, bring the yarn to the front again, and then slip my last stitch purlwise. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this slip 1 yarn over that is needed for brioche in the center here. So this is my setup row done, and I can now turn around. And so my first actual pattern row is row 1 right side A, which means I continue here with my color A, and as I said, all rows start with a knit 1 stitch, so that's what I'm going to do here as well. And then I'm going to increase into this brioche stitch here, which means I brioche knit the stitch, but I leave it on the left hand needle, and then I bring the yarn to the front between the needles, and I brioche knit that same stitch again. And that means, careful sliding them over here, I now have this selvage stitch at the end here, and now I have 3 stitches for the one that I had before, so I have increased 2 stitches. And my selvage stitch on the end of the row is a slip 1 with the yarn in front, which means I bring the yarn to the front again and I slip my selvage stitch purlwise. And now we bring the second color into play. So I just finished my right side row with my color A, and the tail end is on this side. And to work a second right side row with my color B, I need to slide all my stitches to the other tip of the needle. And that's why I'm starting with a DP in, because it's a lot easier to slide those couple of stitches, or those very few stitches, on a solid kind of strong needle, not one that has the cable in the middle. So the circular is great for a larger number of needles, stitches on your needle, but for just those few stitches I prefer the solidity of the DPN. So I hold on to my stitches, and with my right hand I push the needle through the stitches. So the other tip of the needle is right here, and I can now start another right side row with my second color. So this peachy one is my color B, and I'm going to start again the second right side row, row 1 right side B, with my color B. So at the beginning it's a little fiddly because we still kind of need to anchor it somewhere, and it's going to get better after a couple more rows. But for now I'm starting with my net 1, and then I continue with a slip-on yarn over, and for that I bring the yarn to the front, slip the next stitch, and make a yarn over. Sorry, make the yarn over. I split the yarn, and then I purl the next stitch. So the middle stitch of this increase, I purl this middle stitch. The yarn is already in front from the purl, so I can just slip the next stitch for my slip-on yarn over. So the slip-on part is already done, and the yarn over still needs to happen. So on the purl rows you actually have to physically do the yarn overs, and then I slip the last stitch. The yarn is already in front, so I can just slip my selvage stitch here. And then I have both tail ends of my yarn on the same side, which means it's a good time to turn around and start my first wrong side row. So that is row 2, wrong side, and I continue with color A again. And all rows start with a knit 1 selvage stitch. So here as well. And in this row I'm going to be working with brioche purl and slip-on yarn over. So I bring the yarn to the front so I can brioche purl the next stitch. That means I purl the stitch together with its yarn over. The next stitch is a slip-on yarn over, slip-on yarn over, and then another brioche purl. The last stitch is my selvage stitch, which is worked as a slip-on with the yarn in front. The yarn is already in front, so I can just slip the stitch purlwise, and I pull a little on this tail end here to tighten. I can drop my color A, and what you can see now is that your color A is, where is it? It's on this side of the work. These two here are just tail ends, but this is the color A, and the color B that we're going to be working with now is on this side of the work. And to get to that stitches, to be able to work them, I hold on to the stitches again and push the needle through. So I can then work on this side for another wrong side row with my color B. So it's row 2, wrong side, color B. Again, my knit 1 selvage stitch. I bring the yarn to the front to work my slip-on yarn over stitch, but this time we're on a brioche knit row, so they are a little different, the slip-on yarn overs. So to bring the yarn to the front, I slip the slip-on yarn over stitch, and that's all I have to do really, because the next stitch is going to be a brioche knit stitch, and because of the way we catch the yarn for the knit stitch, it automatically creates the yarn over on the stitch before. So we bring the yarn to the front for the slip-on yarn over and slip it. And because now we here don't have a knit stitch following this slip-on yarn over here at the end of this wrong side row, we have to physically make this yarn over again. Okay, otherwise you're going to lose this yarn over, because the last stitch here is a slip-on with the yarn in front. So I have the yarn back in front, and I slip my selvage stitch purlwise, sorry. So we can turn around and we can start on our next right side row with our color A. So the next set of 4 rows, 4 worked rows, 2 counted rows, will be repeated later. So that is row 3 and 4, both with right side with color A and color B, will be repeated later, and I'm going to show you how to do it once, and then you can just repeat it afterwards. So I'm starting my row 3 right side A with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and then I'm going to increase again into this first brioche stitch here, and that works by brioche knitting the stitch. I leave it on my left hand needles, I bring the yarn to the front between the needles, and then I brioche knit that same stitch again. So I've brioche knitted and made this yarn over by bringing the yarn to the front, and I brioche knit again, which means I have created 3 stitches out of 1, and that means 2 stitches increased. And then I can bring the yarn to the front again for my slip 1 yarn over. And because I'm on a brioche knit row, I don't have to do a physical yarn over. I can just leave the yarn in front, slip the stitch purlwise, and then brioche knit the next stitch. The last stitch is my selvage stitch, which means I need to bring the yarn to the front and slip the last stitch purlwise with yarn in front. Then I slide all stitches to the other end of the needle again and work my second right side row, my row 3 right side B, and I start with my knit 1 selvage, and I'm working over this increase, and I do it by bringing the yarn to the front and working the first stitch as a slip 1 yarn over. Then I purl the next stitch, and work with slip 1 yarn over and brioche purl to the end of the row. Sorry, drop that. Slip 1 yarn over, and the yarn is already in front from my yarn over, and I can just slip my selvage stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. And then I turn around and work my first wrong side row, so that is row 4 wrong side A, and I start again with my knit 1 selvage stitch, and then I bring the yarn to the front again because the next stitch is a brioche purl stitch. And slip 1 yarn over, brioche purl. Slip 1 yarn over, brioche purl. And then I slip my selvage stitch with the yarn in front. Then I slide all stitches and work row 4 with color B, starting again with my knit 1 selvage. Then I bring the yarn to the front for my slip 1 yarn over, and because I'm on a knit row, I don't have to physically do the yarn over. I just continue with my brioche knits. Bring the yarn to the front for the slip 1 yarn over and brioche knit. And bring the yarn to the front for the slip 1 yarn over. And because it's the last stitch before my selvage stitch, I do have to make that yarn over now. And I can slip my selvage stitch with the yarn in front. But these 4 rows I just showed you, those 2 right side rows and 2 wrong side rows, are going to be repeated now. So I'm going to quickly do that, and I'll see you when I've finished. So I've repeated rows 3 and 4, those 3 times, and then I have 13 stitches on my needles. And I continue now with row 11, right side A. And this is not where things get more interesting, and the next row over. So I'm starting my row. So this is basically the same as we had in row 3. So I'm continuing kind of like what I did before with an increase here into my first brioche stitch here. And then I continue with slip-on yarn over brioche knit to my selvage stitch. So this is kind of familiar after the repeats we just did. So this is the end of my right side row. Bring the yarn to the front and slip my selvage stitch purlwise. And this is where things get more interesting. We're going to add a stitch marker and we're going to change the texture a little bit. So all rows start with my knit one with the knit one selvage stitch, so that stays the same. But instead of continuing with brioche here, I'm going to purl those 2 stitches. So I bring the yarn to the front and I'm going to purl the next 2 stitches. And I'm going to place a marker after those 2 purl stitches. So this marker marks the change from garter stitch, which will be established here at the beginning, and the true color brioche that is here. So there's no change on this part of the piece, so this is going to be continued as established. The change happens before the marker. So I'm continuing here with slip-on yarn over and brioche purl until I reach the end of my right side row, until I reach my selvage stitch. And when I finish this right side row, I turn around again and I work as established into color brioche with my color A until I reach the marker. And then I slip the marker and then I purl the next 2 stitches. And slip the last stitch purlwise with yarn in front. Then I slide all stitches and work the second wrong side row. So that is row 12, wrong side B, as established in true color brioche until I reach the marker. Then I slip the marker and then I knit the next 2 stitches. Then I bring the yarn to the front and slip my last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front again. So because we now have garter stitch here before the marker and brioche after the marker, to continue our shaping at the beginning of this right side row, we need to now do a different increase. So we had those brioche increases here below, but we don't have any brioche stitches now at the beginning of the row, which means we need to do a different increase. And the one that we're going to do is a make one increase. So we're starting off with knitting the first 2 stitches, and then we make a make one increase. And the make one increase basically works like a backwards loop cast on. So what you do is you take the strand of working yarn and you give it a twist and you place it on your needles, and then you pull to tighten. Okay, I'll just undo it again because this one always gets a bit confusing, even though it's quite easy. So you just grab your working yarn with your thumb and your index finger, and you can turn it ever which way. It's kind of like a yarn over with a twist, and that closes that yarn over and makes sure there is no hole. So it's a loop with a twist, and you just pull to tighten it, and then you knit the next stitch. So that was the make one increase that we're going to be working now at the beginning of the right side row with color A. And then I continue as established into color brioche until I reach my selvage stitch at the end of the row. On the second right side row, so that is now, let me have a look, it's row 13, right side color B. So I'm working in garter stitch until I reach the marker, and then in brioche until the end of the row. And when I work on the right side with color B, that means I knit my selvage stitch and then I purl all stitches until I reach the marker. So there's a bit of a different rhythm to knitting and purling, so you get garter stitch texture in the end. I slip the selvage stitch, and then I work into color brioche with slip one yarn over, brioche purl, slip one yarn over until I reach my selvage stitch at the end of the row again. So my yarn is already in front, so I can just slip my selvage stitch and turn around and work on row 14 with color A on the wrong side. Starting again with a knit one selvage stitch, and then I work into color brioche with brioche purl, slip one yarn over, slip one yarn over, brioche purl until I reach my marker. I slip the marker and then I purl until I reach the last 2 stitches. And then I'm going to make another make one increase. So another twisted loop. No, that was not twisted. Okay, another twisted loop. So let's give it a twist. Place it on the needles and pull to tighten. And then I'm purling the next stitch and slipping the last one with the yarn in front. And then I have my second wrong side row with my color B, and I'm starting again with my knit one selvage stitch and work as established in brioche until I reach the mark. And then I knit to the last stitch bring the yarn to the front and slip my selvage stitch. So you should slowly see the garter stitch emerging here at the beginning of the right side rows, and you have the 2 color brioche at the end here, and you see on the right side your color A dominating, showing up on the knits, and when you turn it around and you see on the wrong side your color B showing up in the knits and dominating on this side. So we're going to repeat the last 4 rows, so rows 13 and 14 once more, and I'm going to do that real quickly, and I'll see you when I've finished. So I finished the repeat of rows 13 and 14. I have a total of 19 stitches on my needles, and I have 7 stitches here before the marker. And that means it's now time to change the pattern again, to add another texture and to add something that is called syncopated brioche. And that is a very big word for switching colors in brioche, which means we're going to now see color B in front and color A in back. And we do that by switching which stitches we brioche knit and which stitches we're going to brioche purl. So it's a big word for something that is not difficult. Row 17 starts again with the knit 1 selvage stitch, and because we're going to add a new texture here, I'm not going to continue in garter stitch, but I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and work the next stitch as a slip-on yarn over. And then I knit to my stitch marker. And I'm going to remove the marker now, but we're going to replace it in the next row, so I'm going to keep it close. And I'm continuing as established in brioche to the end of the row, which means I continue here with a brioche knit, slip-on yarn over, brioche knit to my selvage stitch at the end of the row. And I slide all stitches again and work another right side row with my color B, and this is where I'm going to work the increase now. So I'm going to knit my selvage stitch and I'm going to increase into this next stitch. This next stitch is already a brioche stitch, so it's a stitch that has this yarn over crossing over it, and I'm going to brioche increase into this stitch, and I'm doing the same way as we have done below here, which is a brioche knit, bring the yarn to the front between the needles, and brioche knit into that same stitch again. So I've just increased 2 stitches into this brioche stitch, and I'm going to place a marker to mark the change of pattern. So I will be working syncopated brioche here before the marker, then I'll continue working here those 5 stitches in garter stitch and the normal brioche here. And again, the difference between the syncopated brioche and the normal quote-unquote brioche is just if we knit or purl the stitches. So we're going to switch between brioche knits and brioche purls within one row. And then I work in brioche as established with slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl until I reach the end of my row, the selvage stitch at the end of the row. I turn around and I work in brioche as established on this wrong side row, starting again with my color A and a knit 1 selvage stitch. And as established in this case means brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl. And I continue like that until I reach 5 stitches before the marker, and then I just purl those 5 stitches, and I slip the marker, and this is where we change to syncopated brioche, and we have this increase here. So we have the normal brioche, we have worked brioche purls, and we have the syncopated brioche here. So when I worked purls here, I need to work knits here, and I'm starting with a slip-on yarn over stitch here, and I'm going to knit this middle stitch of my increase. Just the stitch marker is probably going to move around and be in the wrong place, but I'm just going to ignore that for now. And then work another slip-on yarn over, and I finish my slip-on yarn over because I need to slip my last stitch with yarn in front. And I'm going to slide my stitches again, work my second wrong side row with color B as established, with slip-on yarn over, brioche knit until I reach the 5 stitches before the stitch marker. And then I knit those 5 stitches. This is where my stitch marker moved places a bit, so I'm just going to squish it out from underneath the yarn over, and I slip it to my needle. And I just worked brioche knits on this part of the row, and I'm switching to syncopated brioche, and that means I need to brioche purl here. So I'm going to brioche purl the next stitch, and then is a slip-on yarn over and a brioche purl and a selvage stitch. And when I turn around now, you can start to slowly see the syncopated brioche emerging here. And I'm just going to work the next rows so you can see it better, and then you should be all set to continue the pattern. On the next right side row, that would be row 19, we're not going to work an increase because the increase is worked into this first brioche stitch of the row, as we have done below here, but that is now a color B stitch, which means when I work color A, I'm not working that stitch. So the increase now happen on the second right side row. And when I work with my color A on this right side, I'm just going to work as established, which means I knit my selvage stitch, and then I work with slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, slip-on yarn over until I reach the marker. And as you've seen, there's 2 different ways to do the slip-on yarn overs, and they depend on the stitch that follows the slip-on yarn over. So when I have a purl stitch afterwards, I have to physically make this yarn over so the yarn is in front again and I can purl. But now, after this slip-on yarn over stitch here, I will continue with a knit stitch, which means I now don't have to make this yarn over, just like I have here when I have the knit stitches. So I just bring the yarn to the front and slip my slip-on yarn over stitch, and then I slip the marker and then knit the next stitch, and that completes this yarn over in the back here automatically. So I knit those 5 stitches after the marker, and then I work in brioche knit, slip-on yarn over, brioche knit to my selvage stitch at the end of the row. And when I now work my second right side row with my color B, I'm going to work this increase now into this first brioche stitch here. So the row starts again with a knit 1 selvage stitch, and I'm increasing into the next stitch, and I'm doing it the same way as I have done before, with a brioche knit Then I bring the yarn between the needles to the front again and brioche knit again. So 2 stitches increased, and I continue with slip-on yarn over, brioche knit. I slip the marker and purl the next 5 stitches. And then continue with slip-on yarn over, brioche purl until I reach the selvage stitch at the end of this second right side row. On row 20, wrong side with color A, I'm starting again with my knit 1 selvage stitch and continue as established with brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl until I reach 5 stitches before the stitch marker. And then I'll purl those 5 stitches. After slipping the marker, I'm going to work in syncopated brioche, and that means I'm going to slip on yarn over, brioche knit, and to work over this increase here, I'm going to slip on yarn over, knit the middle stitch of this increase and slip on yarn over. I finished this slip on yarn over by making an actual yarn over before slipping my selvage stitch, and then I slide all stitches to the other end of the needle so I can work my second wrong side row, my second row 20 with my second color, my color B, and I work as established with slip on yarn over, brioche knit, slip on yarn over until I reach 5 stitches before the marker again. And then I knit those 5 stitches to the marker. And I slip the marker and continue in syncopated brioche, which means I need to bring the yarn to the front and work the next stitch as a brioche purl. And then I continue in pattern with slip on yarn over, brioche purl until I reach the last selvage stitch. Nope. Okay, so let's have a closer look at what we see here. We see some beautiful 2-color brioche with color A in the front and color B in the back. Then there is a bit of garter stitch and 2-color garter stitch. And then we have syncopated brioche, which means 2-color brioche with color B in front and color A, we see it a little bit here in the back. And I'm totally sure you're now ready to go, ready to knit and continue working the pattern until you finish with part 1, with section 1 of the brioche mystery knit along. Happy knitting. Bye bye.